in what archaeologists are saying is the first discovery of its kind. Researchers uncover an ancient archaeological site preserved underwater. It's an area which is on the west coast of Australia, an aboriginal settlement. For most of the human history of Australia, sea levels were much lower than they are today. We had an ice age around 12,000 years ago. Now, there was an extra dry land there where people lived. Archaeologists could only speculate about how people used those now submerged underwater lands and whether any traces remain there today. But in a study published today in PLOS ONE, we report the first submerged ancient Aboriginal archaeological sites found on the seabed in waters off Western Australia. This is on the conversation by Jonathan Benjamin, Associate Professor of Maritime Archaeology, Flinders University of Australia, Jeff Bailey, Emeritus Professor, University of York, Joe McDonald, Director, Centre for Rock Art Research, University of Western Australia, Michael O'Leary, Senior Lecturer in Climate Geoscience, University of Western Australia, and Sean Ulm, Deputy Director, ARC Centre for Excellence of Australian Biodiversity and Heritage, Cook University. Now, the Great Flood. When people first arrived in Australia, as early as 65,000 years ago, sea levels were about 80 meters lower than today. So they were about 240 feet lower than they were today. So that's like a, what is that? That's about a 20-story building, 30-story building. Now, sea levels fluctuating but continued to fall as the global climate cooled, and the world plunged into the last ice age, which peaked around 20,000 years ago. Sea levels dropped to 130 meters lower than they are now. That's about 300, 400 feet lower. And between 18,000 and 8,000 years ago, the world warmed up. Melting ice sheets caused sea levels to rise. Tasmania was cut off from the mainland around 11,000 years ago. So Tasmania was a part of Australia up to 11,000 years ago. New Guinea separated from Australia around 8,000 years ago. The sea level rise flooded 2.12 million square kilometers of land on the continental shelf surrounding Australia. Thousands of generations of people would have lived out their lives on these landscapes underwater. For the past 4 years, a team of archaeologists, rock art specialists, geomorphologists, geologists, specialist pilots, and scientific divers on the Australian Research Council funded Deep History of Sea Country project have collaborated with the Muruguja Aboriginal Corporation to find and record submerged archaeological sites off the Pilbara coast in West Australia. They said, we studied navigation charts, geological maps, and archaeological sites located on the land to narrow down prospective areas before surveying the seabed using laser scanners mounted on small planes and high-resolution sonar towed behind the boats. In the final phase of the research, our team of scientific divers carried out underwater archaeological surveys to physically examine, record, and sample the seabed. We discovered 200 archaeological sites in the Dampier Archipelago. The first, at Cape Brugiere, comprises hundreds of stone artifacts, including mullers and grinding stones, on the seabed at depths down to 2.5 meters. That's about 6-7 feet down. At the second site, in Flying Foam Passage, we discovered traces of human activity associated with submerged freshwater spring, 14 meters below the sea level, including at least one confirmed stone-cutting tool made out of locally sourced material. Environmental data and radiocarbon dates show these sites must have been older than 7,000 years when they were submerged by rising seas. Our study shows archaeological sites exist on the seabed in Australia with items belonging to ancient peoples undisturbed for thousands of years. In Murujuga, also known as Bupur Peninsula, this adds sustainability to the evidence that we already have of human activity and rock art production in this important national heritage listed place. Underwater archaeology does matter, and there are matters concerning this. The submerged stone tools discovered at Murujuga make us rethink what we know about the past. Our knowledge of ancient times in Australia comes from archaeological sites on land and from indigenous oral stories. But the first people to come to Australia's shores were coastal people who voyaged in boats across the islands of eastern Indonesia. And as we said, because of the fact that the water levels were much lower, the distances for sailing were, of course, much shorter. Now, the early people of Australia took place on land. The early peopling of Australia took place on land that is now underwater. To fully understand key questions in human history, as ancient as they are, researchers must turn to both archaeology and marine science. Projecting a priceless submerged heritage. Submerged archaeological sites are in danger of destruction by erosion and from development activities such as gas and oil installations, pipelines, port developments, dredging, spoil dumping, and industrialized fishing. Protection of underwater cultural sites more than 100 years old is enshrined by UNESCO Convention on Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage 2001, adopted as law by more than 60 countries, but it's not ratified yet by Australia. In Australia, the federal laws that protect underwater cultural heritage in Commonwealth waters have been modernized recently with the Historic Shipwrecks Act of 1976, reviewed and rebadged as Australia's Underwater Cultural Heritage Act 2018, which came into effect July 2019. This new act fails to automatically protect all types of sites, and it privileges protection of non-Indigenous submerged heritage. For example, all shipwrecks older than 75 years old and sunken aircraft found in Australia's Commonwealth waters are given automatic protection. Other types of sites, regardless of age, and including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sites, can be protected but only with ministerial approval. There is a scope for states and territories to protect submerged Indigenous heritage based on existing laws, but regulators have conventionally only managed the underlaw heritage of more recent historical periods. With our find confirming ancient Indigenous sites can be preserved underwater, we need policymakers to reconsider approaches to protecting underwater cultural heritage in Australia. We're confident that many submerged sites will be found in the years to come. These will challenge our current understanding and lead to a more complete account of our human past, so they need to protect our protection now. This is on the conversation and by various professors from universities of York of UK, Australian universities as well, Western, James Cook University and Flinders University. And this is an amazing find. I'm sure that if we do the similar archaeological and marine examination of seacoasts all over the world, they will also find settlements around their seashores, just like they had recently off the shores of Japan. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.